Hello, well today I'm in the fruit cage, and because of the garden renovations last year we lost our old fruit cage, and so we've been working on putting together a new one here on previously uncultivated ground. Now we've already got a row of sweet cherries down this side. On the other side we've got 5 blueberries in pots, and we've got raspberries down the central bed. Now I've done videos on all 3 of those. Today it's the turn of the currants and the gooseberries. So we're planning to put 5 currants down this side, 2 gooseberries at the end. Oh, and we've also got a Japanese wineberry to get in. Now I've only got 3 of the currants here at the moment. The other 2 are supposed to arrive within a week or so. And I hope they do, otherwise there's going to be a couple of holes here. For the currants we're going to have 1 white, 1 black and 3 reds, and that's because we really do like the red currants best. I think really they're quite an underrated dessert fruit. If you let the fruit hang long enough on the bush, they really are very delicious just on their own, or then in a bowl of mixed berries. So we really like the red currants in particular. So I've been playing around here with the tape measure and some big old pots just to try and gauge the right spacing here. So space in the fruit cage is a little bit tight. This would have been much easier if it was 2 or 3 feet wider. But of course it is what it is. It does mean though that I'll have to be a little bit careful with the pruning, not to let the raspberries on one side and the currants on the other get too far into the pathway. The paths here are already pretty narrow. And because I need to be able to get to the back here to tie in the cherries and do whatever pruning is needed, I've decided to space these quite well along the length. We've got plenty of length here, it's the width that is a bit of a problem. So we're going to put these about 6 feet, 1.8 meters apart. I think we've decided to leave the membrane on here. We put membrane down, weed fabric, after we'd prepared this soil last year just to stop the weed growth. And I think what we'll do is we'll make a hole in this and plant through. Anything that saves us just a little bit of time, so with the weeding, is a good thing. So what I'm going to do first is mark out where I want to cut, and then I've got a little trick for taking out the holes. Right, so I'm just using this old bowl as a guide, and then I've got a chalk pen here, and I'm just going to mark the membrane where we want to remove some for the planting hole. So of course this doesn't have to be too precise, it's only a hole that I'm going to plant through. What I'm going to do is take this out with a soldering iron, because if you just cut this stuff it will fray. I've had better weed fabric than this. This one is quite coarse and will fray really badly if the edges aren't sealed, but an old soldering iron is perfect for this job. Right, so I've made the holes and I will get those currants in shortly. What I thought I'd do first is talk a little bit about the variety. So one of the big joys of having your own kitchen garden or allotment is being able to grow those things that you really like, and there are lots of criteria you could apply when picking things like currants and other fruiting bushes and trees. You could look at things such as yield, disease resistance, frost tolerance, especially for anything that's in flower early in the year. And when you look at those sorts of criteria, you will probably end up selecting a more modern variety, because of course modern breeding has looked at those sorts of criteria. Now, there's nothing wrong at all with choosing modern plants, and in a lot of ways it's a good idea, especially if they're more disease resistant. So that's all very sensible and quite a good way to look at it. For me though, I like old varieties, and what gives me great pleasure is growing something that's been around for 100 years or 200 years or even longer, both fruit and vegetables. If I can find something of historic interests, a traditional or regional variety that's been around for a long time, then I'm really delighted to grow that. Most of my variety selections reflect that kind of philosophy. For a white currant, I've picked Bar-le-Duc. Now that comes from a place in France where they've been making a currant jelly for hundreds of years. It goes back at least to the 13th century and quite possibly a bit further than that. Now that variety will probably have a rather lower yield than a more modern white currant, so maybe 30% less. And the same will be true of the black currant at least as well. So that old jelly is quite interesting, because they take the individual fruits and by hand with a sharpened quill, they take the seeds out. And they do that in such a way so as not to damage the fruit or damage it as little as possible. And then the fruit is preserved intact. So it's quite a painstaking process, and as a consequence the product is rather expensive. But they've been doing it that way for centuries, and I find that really quite fascinating. So for me, there really wasn't any other choice. That's really one that I'm very keen to grow. For the black currant, we've chosen Noir de Bourgogne. Now that's an old French variety traditionally associated with the production of cassis. Again, it's a little bit lower yielding, but it's said to have a really fine flavour. Now I've never tasted it, but hopefully in a year's time we might do. For the red currants, we've got a little family tree going on. So we've got three varieties of different ages, but they are related. So the youngster of the pack is Jonkheer van Tets, a Dutch variety that was introduced, if memory serves, in 1941. I think it was raised about 10 years prior to that. So compared with the other varieties, that's a bit of a youngster. So that's quite a well-regarded currant. It's still readily available, quite well known, and there are a number of other varieties that have Jonkheer van Tets in their parentage. One of the parents of that variety was Phase Prolific. So that's come from North America, bred by Lincoln Fay, and that was in around 1868. Now that variety we have grown before, and that's a great currant. I really like it. The berries are a good size, quite long strigs, and really quite finely flavoured, especially if they're left to stand on the bush long enough, and they will stand there for plenty of time, increasing in sweetness and improving in flavour. And I really like that variety. I would always want that in a collection of currants. Now, one of the parents of Phase Prolific was a variety known as Victoria, or at least it's thought to be. Now that one dates back to, well, at least several decades earlier. Now, as is often the case with fruiting plants in particular, it happens with vegetables as well, but particularly with fruit trees and bushes, when you try to trace an old variety back, it gets very confused. So you find a lot of varieties that pick up multiple names, and for apple and pear trees that have been around a few hundred years, there can be dozens of names for essentially the same variety. And you also find sometimes that different varieties have been given the same name, either by chance or through mistaken identity, even through a simple mix-up on labels. So it does become a little bit difficult to untangle the history of older varieties. And it looks like Victoria is synonymous with at least 3 or 4 other quite well-known currants of its time. And so I suspect it dates back rather earlier than the sort of 1840-ish that Victoria can be dated to. Now, one of the varieties that it may well be identical to, or at least extremely closely related, is Wilson's Long Bunch, and that's the final variety we've picked. So if in that tangled web of history it is actually the case that the Long Bunch is the same as Victoria, then we've got a little family tree of quite well regarded currants, certainly well regarded in their day. So although there are other very sensible criteria on which to pick a plant, I'm always looking for some little historical story, something that interests me as a gardener. And like I say, one of the great joys of having your own garden is being able to pick exactly what excites you in a plant. And I know that the yield of some of these might not be fantastic. Jonkheer Tets will yield quite well, as will Phase Prolific. But I think the other 3 are probably going to yield a little bit lower than a more modern variety. And of course, certainly modern varieties of blackcurrant are rather more tolerant of cold weather than the old ones. But nonetheless, that's what really interests me. So that's our choice for currants. Then we've got 2 gooseberries. Now there's a vast array of gooseberries that you could choose from, and lots of those come from sort of Yorkshire, Lancashire, that part of the country. So one of those I've picked is Lancashire Lad, and that's a red fruited sort, and the other is Early Sulphur. So that's as the name suggests, a yellowish colour. Now I think both of those can make reasonably good dessert fruits if they're allowed to ripen fully. Otherwise they both certainly make good culinary fruits. Those are 2 varieties that we had in our old fruit cage, along with a handful of others. Here we're going to grow them as bushes. In the old fruit cage we had them as double cordons, so they just came up with 2 stems in sort of a U shape, and so we were able to put quite a few different varieties in, just for variation. But here we're going to have them as more traditional bushes, so we've only probably got room for 2. Right, so now I'm going to get these planted. I'll start with 2 of the currants that we healed in recently. So the first one I've got here is Bar-le-Duc. Now these have been prepared in the traditional way, so started with a leg of bare wood before they've been headed and allowed to branch. Black currants and red currants have different fruiting habits. So the black currant fruits on 1-year-old and older wood, but as it gets older it becomes less productive, so particularly old wood will not be that fruitful. So a black currant is typically grown on a stall, so it's planted quite deep, and then branches will come up from just below the soil level, and new branches should be thrown up regularly, and then each winter you can go through and remove a quarter to a third of the oldest wood, and in that way you've got a constant supply of new productive fruiting wood. Now the red currants and white currants, they're essentially the same plant, it's just a small genetic difference that produces the red pigment or not. They will fruit quite happily on old wood, so you can train these into all sorts of different forms, cordons, fans, pretty much anything you can do with a spur-bearing apple, say, you can do with a red currant, and you can treat them pretty much the same. So the traditional way of doing it was always with this this leg grown pretty much like you would a bush or a half standard apple. Now this is a little bit less common now. I think it's much more common to find them growing exactly like the black currant, so with a stall, and new branches will be coming up each year. I don't have a particular opinion each way. I know this is the traditional way, and I've got one white currant and one red that are like this. I'm pretty sure the other red currant, if and when it arrives, will be of the sort of more modern style. But I don't know which is best. All I can say is that this used to be the common way of doing it. So I'm going to put Bar-le-Duc here, and then I'm going to do the three red currants. First Jonkheer Tets, then Phase Prolific, and then the long bunch, and then right at the end I'll put the black currant. Now the reason for that order is that Jonkheer Tets is a particularly early sort. This end of the fruit cage may be, if anything, a little bit warmer than the other, so black currants can do better in cooler conditions, and I want the earliest fruiting sort up this end where it might benefit from the little extra warmth early in the year. So I'm not going to do anything clever with these. I'm just going to take out the planting hole, drop them in and firm them in. Now you can see on here that this really is the last opportunity for moving these. These are already starting to burst into leaf. So it would have been better if I'd done this a few weeks ago. This is not the best soil in the garden. You can see we've got some big old stones in here. This is not great soil. We have been adding lots of compost to it to try and improve it, but that's a process that takes quite a long time. So this is not perfect conditions for these new plants, but we don't have a choice, and neither do they. So with the red currant, ideally you want an open-centered form, and you want some more side branches to fill in the space around here. So although these could be left, I think it's probably just as well to prune these back as soon as you've planted. So I I'm going to cut these back to where there are some handy buds. So I'm going to take this one back to here. So you're looking for outward facing and other buds that will fill in this space but not crowd the center. I think on this one, I'll take that back to here. This one I'll just prune back to an outward facing bud. And this little one I'm just going to leave as it is. So this one is phase prolific, and I think you can see that this is a much more vigorous specimen. The other positive thing here is that the soil is much better as we move up the fruit cage. That end is by far the worst. So this stuff isn't actually too bad. So a similar idea here, I need to prune a little bit of this to try and encourage an open centre and the development of new branch. Now this has a lot more branching on it already. This one though is not helpful at all. This is crossing over, it's going in the wrong direction. So I'm going to take that one out. I quite like these, but this one's not actually that helpful, so I'm also going to take that one out. And I will prune that back. And I think I will do the same here as well. I'll just leave these because that opens this up nicely. I think what I might do with this one is take this back to a bud that's facing this direction, because these two branches are too close together there. This one I'm going to take back to an outward facing bud, and I will do the same around here. I'll just take the tip of that off. I could remove these two, but I'm not sure about that yet, so I don't want to do anything too extreme here at the moment. I think that will probably do to get this started, and I can revisit this decision later. It may be that I want to take these out and keep these other branches. They might be slightly better placed. No, I'm going to do it right now. Yep, okay. I think that probably is better. So that should start to make a nice open-centered bush here. So here's my Jonkheer van Tets. Now, I added this to an order, well, over a year ago now, to make up a minimum order value, and thinking I would plant it in the fruit cage, but we'd already decided at that point to move the fruit cage, so it got healed in here temporarily. Unfortunately, it's been here for a year now, so there's some growth on here I want to remove before I move the plant, because I want to see where the branches are in order to orient it correctly when I plant it. So this branch here is no good. It's rubbing against this other one. It's going in entirely the wrong direction, so I'm going to take that one out at the base. And then I've got these two. These two can't, well, there's another branch here that I can remove first. These two can't both be here. They're rubbing, they're far too close together. I think I will take this one out And I'll try and get that as close as I can to the base. Oh, that's a tough branch. Don't want that one really. That one was growing up through the centre of the bush, so that's not that helpful either. I will probably want to prune a little bit more after I planted it, but that at least lets me see a bit more of the shape so I can get the orientation right in the planting hole. Now, the last two were grown on a leg in the traditional way. This is, I think, probably more typical now. So this looks just like a black currant. So new branches are coming up from the stall here, and that's okay, that's not a problem. They don't necessarily need to be renewed in the same way as a black currant, but there's no harm, I suppose, in removing some of the older wood and letting the newer, more vigorous wood come through. So I'm not going to do anything funny when I plant this. I'm just going to plant it just as it is now, and we'll grow this one on as it's been grown this last year. I suppose I could cut a lot of this stuff back and sort of start the training again with a single stem, but I'm not going to do it in this case. I'm going to let it grow on in the way it began. Well, it was quite a job getting this old fella out. The roots had gone quite a long way, and obviously I've had to cut some of those off, but I've managed to preserve a fairly nice root ball there, and I hope it won't mind too much about the move. Of course, the soil where it was situated was nice and light and fairly free of stone, so it had developed very nicely there. It's rather better than the soil over here, so it's not going to be happy with me, but hopefully it will survive. So I've marked out the position I want the gooseberries in. Now, these are a little bit close together here, but that's because I need to be able to get round the side and over to the back here, because at some point we will have decided what we're going to grow against the back face of the fruit cage. It might be more raspberries, or it could be a fan-trained fruit tree, I'm not sure yet. But whatever it is, I don't want these gooseberries getting too much in my way. So I will have to keep them under control with pruning. So as I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit late to be moving these. You might be able to make out that these leaves are already starting to come out. And then on the roots, we have a lot of new fine roots here. They've been put on since these have been healed in. So really, these should have been put in their proper place 3 or 4 weeks ago, I would have thought. I've been slightly caught out by just how quick these are, but I expect they'll be okay. The soil up this end is quite different from the other. This soil has a lot of silt in it. It's quite heavy, it's quite rich, and although I've picked a few of the larger stones out, there's a lot less stone at this end. So I think they should be quite happy here once they get established. So this one is early sulphur. So the last bush here is Lancashire Lad. This one's not quite so vigorous as the other, but I'm sure when it settles in it will do fine. So the final plant today is this Japanese wineberry, which has come in this nice deep pot. This is one of our favourite soft fruits. This really is a fantastic berry if you've got room for it. It's not quite as prolific as an ordinary raspberry, but the flavour is fantastic. And if you're not growing in a fruit cage, this one can be very useful because the birds don't tend to eat this. The fruit is enclosed in its calyx for a lot of the time, and then it's got a slightly sticky residue on it, and the birds don't seem to want to attack those. So if you've got a spot in the open, that could be an interesting candidate. It is quite vigorous and it's a nasty prickly thing. What we're going to do is just put this in the corner. I'll leave some space here because this will develop a fairly good sized stall here as the new canes come up, and then I'll train it horizontally along this mesh here. I need to strap this mesh in a bit more tightly. It's just flapping around at the moment, but that's a job for another day. So there's nothing really to tease out in this root ball. This is a very fibrous root system here. So I'm just going to drop that in and firm it into place. I think that will be fine there. So in terms of pruning the gooseberries, there's not much that I want to do. I just want to nip that off because that branch is damaged. This is going to be far too low here, so I'm going to take that off there. And similarly, I think I'll take that one there. That's growing into the middle, so I'm going to take that out. Actually, that's a little bit crowded there. I'm going to take that out. But I think that's probably enough at this stage, and they'll get a proper going over next winter once they're established. Now on this one we have some crossing wood here. That's quite a nice piece of wood actually. I'm going to take this, I'm going to take that out. Freeze that up. This is, I'm going to cut that back. I think to there. That's all right. I think this is probably not helpful because this is in what should be the center of the bush, so I'm inclined to take at least that much out. And I'm not going to do too much here. I want to see how these develop over the coming year and review the structure in the winter, next winter. That's probably growing in the wrong direction. That's going to come back into the center of the bush. I'll take that out, and I think I'll leave that there. Well, that's all the planting done for today, and the fruit cage is really coming along now. I've got the other 2 currant bushes to get in if and when they arrive, and then we've got some strawberry plants on order. So this last stretch of empty bed is where at least some of the strawberry plants will be going, alongside the blueberries. We've also got a couple of fold down benches. There's one here already, and there's another lurking in the garage, and we might utilize those for growing some strawberries in pots. We're also planning to put some strawberry plants in 1 or 2 of the cold frames. So those will be an early variety, and we'll use that to get our earliest crop of the year. Well, that's all from me. Thanks very much for watching, and bye for now.